Hello, and welcome to A Dash of Salt. I'm Dr. Shelley Ann, and I'm so glad you're here. Whether you stumbled upon this podcast by accident or you're here because the subject drew you in, welcome. SALT is an acronym for Society and Learning Today. This podcast was created as an outlet for inviting fresh discussions on sociology and learning theories that impact your world. Each episode includes a wide range of themes that focus on society and everyday learning, whether formal or informal. So let's get stuck in, shall we? Welcome to A Dash of Salt. Today I'm joined by Carline Crevecoeur. Carline is a Haitian American born certified obstetrician and gynecologist raised in Brooklyn, New York. She attended Brooklyn Technical High School and later St. John's University, earning a bachelor's degree in chemistry. After 20 years of medical service in New York and in Pennsylvania, Carline gave up her career to raise and homeschool her 5 African American children. Carline has volunteered on education boards and sponsored public health programs. She's the first Black woman elected for a seat on the SCASD school board. Carline has written a beautiful little memoir called Pressure Makes Diamonds, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So I'm delighted to have you on the podcast today to talk to you about why you decided to leave your profession to homeschool your children and your experiences of learning for yourself along the way. Welcome, Carline.
Oh, thank you so much. I love that introduction.
Well, I want to get started right away by asking you to tell us a little bit about your backstory and, if you would expand on some of what I shared just in that brief bio.
Okay, Haitian American, it's correct. I left my country, though, when I was 2 years old, and I came to this country and I settled in Brooklyn, New York, like you mentioned, when I was 5. So during those 3 years, my dad and my mom and I, the 3 of us, we traveled. Because my father got scholarships to different, he was a mathematician and a lawyer in Haiti. And so he got scholarships to different universities throughout the world. We lived in Africa for a year, we lived in France for a year, and finally we settled in the United States. And that was in the 60s when there was a lot of turbulence in Haiti. And so our family left Haiti. And unfortunately, that was the great brain drain around that time. And so I came with my parents first, and then my 5 siblings came later, and then my grandmother came. And with immigrants, that's kind of the trajectory, I guess, because, the father comes first and settles down and decides where he's going to raise his family, and then the wife and the children comes later. And so basically that was what happened in our family. So most of my life, I grew up in New York, Brooklyn at first, and then Queens, and then back to Brooklyn when I went to medical school. And then my husband and I were both physicians, and we decided to leave New York. We were both New Yorkers, long life New Yorkers. I thought I would never leave New York for good. We were just young and happy and married, no kids. And we both got really wonderful job offers in Pennsylvania, central Pennsylvania. So we figured, why not? We'll just stay a couple of years and then we'll keep moving. We were thinking about Maryland at one point because we both have families there. And so 5 years later in Pennsylvania, we have 5 kids. We had them one after the other. And so we ended up living in central Pennsylvania for the last, 20 years or so. But we lived in different counties. The first one was in Altoona, and then we moved to State College, like the book said. But they're both considered central Pennsylvania. They're about 45 minutes from each other. And then we raised our kids, and we've been living here since.
So 5 little kids under 5.
Yes.
That must have been a whirlwind of activity for you from the moment the first one came, really getting through college, I'm sure.
It was, but I cheated with my last pregnancy because I had twins. I've always wanted 5 because of my family, and my husband comes from a family of 5. Yeah. So we had always talked about having 5 children. But after he had his boy and his girl, He says, no way, we're done at 2. And I said, no, you promised 5. And then we settled for 4. Then I got twins at the end. So that's how we ended up having
Well,
5.
you
And
got what you wanted, didn't you?
exactly,
I think
exactly.
that's great. And we're going to talk a little bit more about your kids individually a little bit later on down the line here. But I read your lovely little memoir, and it's called Pressure Makes Diamonds: From Homeschooling to the Ivy League, a Parenting Story. And it reads almost as a personal sort of field guide for successful homeschooling parents. At least that's how I felt when I was reading it. I love the little nuggets of wisdom in there, but it just really feels like this sort of, crash course and field guide, and how do you handle this type of situation through your eyes and through your story. Why did you decide to write the book? And, who was your perceived audience?
Okay, well, I decided to write the book, and that wasn't the book that I had in mind to write because of the fact that my kids end up going to the Ivy League, all 5 of them. I was told, oh my God, you have to write a book about this. And so when I sat down to write the book, I didn't want to become too presumptuous about what I did was so perfect. I have the secret, because that's not what I really wanted to convey. I really wanted to end up telling our story. And I included all these nuggets of details, like you said, because whatever somebody could glean out of our experience, I would like them to use it. But I also wanted to let them know that it was my journey with my kids. And that's important because all of my 5 children were so different. And you have to really keep that in mind. What worked for my kids may not necessarily work for yours, and especially not at that moment. Like even with Danielle and Michael, they were my 2 oldest. And what I did with Danielle, Mikey was just not into that. And I had to find out what worked best for him. And so there are some things, of course, general things like maybe puzzles and mind games. I love doing that with the kids. And I think it helps a lot of kids with their creativity, with how they approach problems. I think that's universal. But when to introduce that to different kids, that's questionable based on your child. So this is why I kind of added at the end like a parenting story to let people realize that it is the story that I'm saying about my kids.
Mhm. Yeah, and I absolutely love that, because each child is individual, and each child learns differently and at their own stages and ages. Everybody's different. You can't have that expectation that every child that's ready for like first grade or second grade necessarily is ready for first grade or second grade in that same capacity. So what made you decide to leave your practice? So a lot of parents and especially mothers, um, especially in this day and age, figure out a way, or sometimes try to figure out a way to balance career and and schooling their children, or career and raising their children, because they don't want to let that piece of their profession go, or that part of their identity go as as a professional. But what made you decide to actually leave your practice as an OBGYN and homeschool your children? And when did you actually start? Did you start at the very beginning when the first one was of age?
No, that is actually going back to a previous question that you've asked me about my target audience.
Oh,
And in
yes.
writing my book, when I sat down to do it, I was thinking of is my target audience? Who am I talking to? Who do I think will glean anything from my book, or will like it, or could relate to it? And of course, it was homeschoolers, and especially Black homeschoolers. That was something that was not done. And now recently I was on a panel with Black homeschoolers, and we could talk about that later.
Yeah.
It was about immigrants, because I feel like sometimes immigrants are not looked upon in the best of ways. And I think even immigrants themselves, being in a new country, feeling if you'll be accepted. And when we first moved to this country, we were not accepted, especially in Brooklyn. And I talk about that briefly. And so I wanted to let immigrants know that they could succeed in their adopted home. Anyone can really. There's going to be hurdles. I don't want to make it seem like it's easy. No, it's not easy. There is racism. There is a lot of hurdles to have to navigate through, but it could be done. So I think I was trying to reach to immigrants, Black Americans, the fact that sometimes we're not seen as intelligent in STEM, in computers, in piano playing, in music, except like hip hop maybe, or basketball and sports. And my kids were swimmers, and so we did not fit that mold, and that's okay. This shouldn't be a mold for one particular group of people, and parents. I feel like every parents could relate to a book like this because it deals with children. Cancer patients, because unfortunately I had to go through that. And I think we built a community of our own. Having gone through it, I could relate more to everything cancer related. And now going back to this previous question, this question that you just asked me is women. And I felt that sometimes things are changing for us, but I think growing up, especially in the 90s, early 90s, we were told that we could do everything. We could be doctors, we could bring home the bacon, we could raise the children, we could do all that. And when I was by myself in central Pennsylvania, my husband and I were two professionals raising 5 children, I realized that I couldn't. It was impossible. When I was taking care of my patients, I was thinking about my kids. I have to go pick up my kids. If I get a phone call, one of my kids is sick, I have to stop what I'm doing. I have to tell my patients, I'm sorry, I have to leave. When I'm with my kids, I'm thinking about my patients, that I do this, that I do that, or why could be causing this problem that she's having repeatedly. We tried a lot of different things. I just felt that my world, I was trying to separate my world into my professional life and my mothering life, and it was just hard. And so when my 2 oldest didn't want to go to school anymore, and then my middle child got injured by the babysitter, because that was another nightmare that we had to go through, that a lot of parents are understanding how important babysitters or qualified daycare is, especially with the pandemic. That was the last straw, and I had to quit my job. And it wasn't something that I wanted to do. I went screaming and kicking in every possible way. And I did it. And it was one of the best things that I've ever done. One of the interviewers I spoke to recently told me that how she admires me because she had the same problem with me, but then she ended up putting her kids in private school. But I just took out my kids. And I didn't want all of that adulation because I didn't think I deserved it, because there was no private school in the area that I was in. Maybe I would have done it if I had alternatives. I really didn't have alternatives. I looked at different alternatives and I tried, but there weren't any. And at the end of the day, I said, okay, you know what? I wanted to have these 5 kids. They're my responsibility. I'll put my job, my profession on hold. I always thought I would go back, but I didn't. And that was the reason I did it. And again, like I said, it was one of the best things that I could have ever done. I enjoyed it. I loved it.
Mm-hmm. And, one of the things that you said just made me think of that idea of, sometimes it comes to the point where you either pick your passion or your passion picks you. And, but the great thing about, I think, all stages of the life course, our life course, is that it is fluid and it changes, and something that you may not have been so passionate about in the beginning, or like say you weren't passionate about your job and you just felt more impassioned about homeschooling your children at that time, and then you get to a point when your kids are older and you decide, well, they're a little bit more independent, they can learn more on their own, maybe I'll go back to work, and that passion may resurface, for going back into the medical field and practicing medicine. But I think that's one thing that's really important for people to realize, is that, things change in our life stages and,
Right.
and along our life course. And, sometimes, like I said, we either pick our passion or our passion picks us, and you get involved in something. And then all of a sudden you realize, well, this is really important. And I want to pursue this a little bit more specifically. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in your story in just a bit, about getting onto a school board after being a homeschool mom. So, but you did touch on one of the questions that I was going to ask you about, do you think that you will go back? You did say, you haven't gone back yet. And all of your kids are out of college now, is that right?
My youngest is graduating this year.
Yeah. So, do you think that shift might happen for you, or?
No, no. And unfortunately, it has to do with my illness because after chemo, I had a lot of neuropathy. I still have it in my fingers and toes. And I would be doing a disservice to women. That's who I see, my patients, if I wasn't feeling I was 100% myself. One of the things that I really pride myself in was thorough examination, especially breast exam. And I worked in a breast clinic in New York for a while, and I got really, really good at really feeling any kind of nodules. And so I really always took my time doing that. And I would always teach my patients how to examine themselves, how to examine their breasts. And with my neuropathy, that would definitely be a hindrance. And then, of course, with the surgical tech, there's so many things that have changed in the surgical field and obstetrician, in OB/GYN. So because of those reasons, it would be really hard to go back.
Mhm. And I know one of the other things that your book touches on is the struggles that you went through with your littles when, when each of them in their own way with their learning processes. And now I do want to say that, all of your children were incredibly high achievers and they have gone on to Ivy League colleges. And, even with those struggles, what do you attribute their success to mostly? And tell us a little bit about some of those moments of doubt that you had.
Okay. In the beginning, I felt that, wait a minute, I'm not a teacher. Why am I even doing this? Could I even do it? And I think that a lot of times uh, we talk ourselves out of things that we don't even give ourselves a chance to experience. And there's nothing wrong, I think, in trying something and realize, okay, you know what? I wasn't cut out for this. Let's go. Let's take another path. Nothing is written in stone that once you start down this road, you have to continue it. But don't give up without even trying. And this is what we try to tell our kids. And yet, we have all these self doubts. And I always tell my kids that, they were in so many competitions. And I always told them, I am so proud of you for even trying. How many people are sitting in their chair now and thinking, oh, I could be a podcaster. I think I can. I could be a good interviewer, but they're afraid to taking that first step.
Mhm.
And and then always having regrets in your life. What if I did this? Could things have been different? And I think regrets are so useless because it doesn't accomplish anything. I would have liked to try and fail than not try at all, because at least you gave it your best shot. And even if you fail something now, you realize that maybe it's the way you approached it, and you always learn something through that journey. And it's not something that you're going to use in this specific time, but it'll come back and you'll realize, wow, and I learned this because of the fact that I homeschool my kids, or that I ran for school board, or there's always something to learn, even in your failures. And I would say maybe because of your failures that you learn so much from. And I think that one should never stop learning, because what else is there to do? If you don't push yourself, challenge yourself, learn new things, read new books, meet new people, all of that is a different part of learning, but it's still learning none the same. And so when people tell me, what if you run out of material to teach your kids? I'm thinking that's impossible. We'll learn Russian. There's so many things out there to learn. I don't think that you could ever run out of materials.
Yeah.
You run out of creativity, maybe, or you run out of, um, your own self-doubts, maybe, but there's so many things to learn. And so yeah, it was a journey going through this with my kids. The success, I think, is that they grew up in a very stable, loving, safe environment. And I think that does wonders for a child, because they're not afraid to ask questions. They're not afraid to let their curiosity lead them. I encourage finding information or their curiosity. There was this one experiment that I did with all of them. Of course, it was mostly geared to my oldest two, Danielle, she was maybe around maybe 8, 7, and then the rest were like a year apart. And we did this planaria study. Planarias are flatworms that have ability to regenerate. And so we cut the flatworms like in 3 pieces. They're tiny, and they regroup, they regenerate almost their whole body. They made new heads. And the kids were like, Mom, what if we were able to do that? And I said, well, think about some areas in your body that you could do that. And they said, what about our teeth? Our teeth could regenerate. I said, well, only twice, but then we learn out other animals like sharks that can keep regenerating their teeth because it's so important. And then one of my other kids said something about, Mom, do they feel pain? I said, well, why don't we study the nervous system and see about their nervous system? And so from that regeneration experiment, there were so many other avenues that we were able to bounce off from. And it wasn't me leading the discussion, it was their questions. Mm-hmm. And with their questions, and when kids ask questions, they are more eager to find out the answers. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes I didn't know the answer. And I said, let's go look it up. And they were shocked. Mom, you don't know the answer? Like they look up to me. Of course you know the answers. I said, no, I don't. But we could look it up together. And once they realized that Mom doesn't know everything, which is a bad moment, but still it's a good moment because now they feel empowered that they could teach themselves, they could lead their education, they could learn information on their own, and we'll discuss that. So a lot of times when I assigned them projects to do, they went way beyond what I had expected. They incorporated so many different avenues in it that once you let kids go, it's amazing the things they could do. There's a lot of different types of homeschoolers, from homeschoolers to unschoolers. And I feel like I'm in the middle. I'm not an unschooler because I do have certain structure, but within those structures, I let them do what they want. But I do set guidelines. I do say we're going to study chemistry, or we're going to do physics, or we're going to do biology. But within that, within those units, they could take it wherever they want to go. And I feel like I like to have the best of both worlds.
First of all, I do want to say that the very last line of my thesis, my PhD thesis, is learning is lifelong, never stop. It's the very last sentence in my thesis that I wrote when I did my PhD. And I just got so excited when you started talking about the fact that learning is lifelong, and we should always, all of us are always learning, every day. Just listening to a podcast, you can learn so much from conversations that other people are having about their experiences and opportunities and things that they've gone through and that kind of thing. And, one of the things that I was just starting to say there was, as someone who has studied education, the sociology of education, I have found that there are, many types of teaching approaches that really work. And there's a lot of scholars and experts in these certain areas that are really trying to get teachers, especially old school ways of thinking in the public and sometimes private institution areas, to stop having the teacher be that sage on the stage or that person in the front of the room, and allowing the teacher to explore in that learning along, more of that child-centered approach. And that's one of the things that popped into my head right away when you were talking about what you do is, you really took a child-centered approach and let your child be interested and let their questions lead where they go next in their learning process. And you're learning right, and you are confident in letting them know, I'm learning right along with you.
Yes.
Mom may have, been a highly educated person, and yeah, there's a lot of things that I know, but I don't know this, and I want to learn it with you. And I think that's really, really, exciting. And I know you also used a lot of active teaching approaches as well in your homeschool classroom with your kids. Which approach, is there one specific approach that you found most successful for you? Or was it a variety of approaches that you used in teaching? And what did you use and why?
Yeah, I used a variety because you just never know which ones that the kids are going to really click with. And so I always did what I also like when I was growing up, the things that I like. And I feel like that's so important when you decide to homeschool your kids. Look at the courses that inspired you and why, and then pick up from that. And it may be different from your kids, but at least you have a starting point. And the courses that you didn't like, why? And one of the things I know in school, geography, I was never really good in geography. It never really interested me. And I had to find out why. And I said, okay, I'm going to make geography much more interactive with my kids because I'm going to have to teach them that. So I found the ways. We did map drawings, we did physical map, we did using Kellogg cornflakes like the mountains, the Rocky Mountains, the Appalachians. We used straws for the lakes and rivers. I really wanted them to get engaged with it. It's a project, but at the same time, when we travel also, we would talk about where we're going. And I would ask these kids, now that we have GPS for everything, but the kids were responsible of mapping out where we're going, which I think it's such a critical skill to teach them, you know? And so the interactive approach is very good. I like that. And now, of course, we'll talk about the school board method, being on the school district. I feel that some of these approaches are so much harder to do with 30 kids. And then you have a curriculum to finish. And so occasionally when Danielle discovered multiplication on her own and she thought it was so fantastic, I found out I know the key, like she invented it. I really wanted all my kids to kind of discover multiplication or cover these new theorems in math that they think they're the ones that discovered it. But it got harder. I got even a little bit more structured as they got older, because then we had SATs, we had all these other things to study and prepare for. So some of my most creative years were when they were younger. And I'm glad I did at least that, because their creativity did continue until they got older. But their approaches to solving problems was so ingenious. And it started from very young age. But my structure, my creativity, I think became limited as they got older, because there are curriculums that we had to finish. There's AP exams to prepare. And so that part of my teaching, I was not happy with it, but it was a necessary evil because we had to get a little bit more structured. Mm-hmm. And I feel like in schools, we criticize schools a lot, but schools have to report to parents. They have to have report cards. They have to say, what are you teaching my kids? When my kids were younger, we never had exams. We never had report cards, because I knew what they knew and I knew what they didn't understand. And I didn't have to report to anyone. But because of the schools, and you have to report to to parents, I think it's so much different to allow the creative process to lead itself, because we have a certain number of days in school. Mm-hmm. And so that, because I've always thought about that, how, and we are changing a lot of curriculum to make it more child-based curiosity learning. But even within that, it has to be limited. But at least there's an acknowledgement, I feel, that's going on through a lot of schools.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, one of the things you talked about is when you really did those really creative approaches and those active learning approaches when they were younger, you were really helping your children to learn, to learn by doing, to learn by experiencing, and to really hone their own their self-analysis and their own analytical skills. And then when it comes time to, sort of put their nose in a book per se, and really kind of learn what they needed to learn to pass those important exams that would get them into college and university, they had that critical ability through that active learning to be able to say, okay, wait a second, I need to take this structure, I need to look at it a little different, but I realize that this is still learning for me. And though it may be a little bit more of that traditional sort of old school way of learning, they have that ability because you've taught them through that creative process early on.
Right. And a lot of times parents don't think, or teachers maybe, when you're teaching them one thing, you're really preparing them for something else. because I was playing chess with my oldest, Danielle. She taught herself how to play chess at 6 years old. It was just amazing, just by watching. And recently, when I was trying to teach my nephew who's sick and he's really smart, he got bored with it and he was getting confused and he didn't want to do it. And then I realized I never really taught my kids chess. She watched me play with my husband and wanted to say, what are they doing? Her curiosity made her want to learn. And then when I started playing with her, all the others, that's how they learned. I never sat down to teach them, this is the knight, this is how the knight moves, because kids don't like learning like that sometimes. It turns them off. And so when I started playing chess with Mikey, my second oldest, one of the reasons for him, it was important to play chess with him because he was making a lot of math mistakes. He was forgetting to cross out, to carry. He was just going through it so fast that he didn't stop to correct his work and check his work and go through the process. And so when we started playing chess, and he would move his queen in a position that I could take his queen, and I would say things like, do you really want to make that move? See, this is what's happening when you do math. You go too fast and you lose, and you could lose your queen right now. And losing his queen, everybody knows that the game's almost over. It suddenly clicked, like, I am moving too fast. I need to think. I need to look at the whole board. I need to look at different moves. And his math improved. And I don't, if there's theories about math, piano, and chess, how, they help that analytical thinking, and one helps the other. But I also think that it helped him plan his move. It helped him not be too impulsive. And he started doing so much better in math once we started playing chess. And his chess improved also.
In your memoir, in 2008, as part of you had made this decision that as part of your civics class with your children, you'd sign them up along with yourself to volunteer for the Obama campaign. And
Yes.
tell us what made you decide to do this for civics, and what was the experience like for you and your children?
Because at that time, I don't think I ever really taught about civics class until the big, controversy with the first Black president and then the first woman president. They were running against each other. And it just presented itself as a good opportunity to teach them about civics, to teach them about election, and get involved in the campaign. And so the kids were pretty excited about that. At the time, Michael is now an independent, but at the time he was a Republican, I was a Democrat, and I felt that was perfect because he could give his viewpoint on why he believes some of the things that he does. And I would give my viewpoint and let the kids figure out themselves. And a lot of people think that when you homeschool your kids, you instill all of your own values in them. And in a way you do things that are important to you, but you also have to let them know that mom may be wrong, maybe dad's right, maybe being a Republican, like, you can still make up your own mind. We're presenting you these different options, but then you could come with the third option. Like, you're not a carbon copy of me.
Mhm.
That's how people learn.
Mhm.
And so, yes, maybe the kids will say, okay, yeah, mom, I see your point. Or they'll say, I see your sister's point, and maybe I'll change my mind. That's okay. There's nothing that you should be afraid of speaking to your kids about the world, about what's happening. Some things I think you can wait until they get older, because I don't think every conversation is appropriate at every age. But I think that they need to know what's happening in the world because it is their world, and they're going to go out there, and they need to know how to live in that world, how to relate to that world, how to ask the proper questions in that world. And I think that parents are the first teachers of their children. And if they can't ask you the questions, who are they going to ask the questions to?
Mhm. Mhm. And that's the thing is, as parents, it starts it starts in the home, because
That's in the
children's
home.
learning always starts in the home before they ever even set foot into any type of formal schooling capacity. And I think what you've said is really important, because we are responsible for either teaching our children to be closed-minded or
Yes.
open-minded. Debate can be very healthy,
Yes.
as long as those who are debating can both be open-minded
Right.
about the other side's position. And I think what happens a lot, as we see many times in the public and in television and in politics and everything else, social media, where you have some open-minded people who are wanting to have a healthy conversation, discussion, debate about a subject, an issue, and then there's the closed-minded people who get in there and they start taking it personally, and that's when bashing occurs, and terrible things that are said about people. It becomes really personal, and it's
Right.
really disappointing. And I think that if people could start realizing that having an open mind, you can still have your own opinion, your own position, but still
Right.
have the respect for somebody else's opinion and position on certain matters, and not always expect that a debate isn't about specifically trying to change somebody else's mind.
Right.
It's about giving them the information that they need to make that informed decision on whether they want to change their mind or not.
Right. And I feel like everybody now is set in their camps that even if some part of it doesn't make sense, but they have to swallow the whole thing because that's who their camp is. That's who they're with now. It's a sort of identity. And so you have to obey or believe everything from that camp. And it's not true. There's some good things and bad things in every little camp that's around. And now you feel that even if you want to change your mind, you can't, because that's going to seem as a negative. Like, you're not allowed to change your mind. You're not allowed to grow and learn. And that's wrong. But I think it's done on purpose. I think our politics has become terribly because of it. The headline will say such and such changed their mind, like they're flip-flopping, and you don't want to be seen as a flip-flopper, so you got to stand your ground even if it doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
And
and that's really disappointing. It
that
really is
is,
disappointing. We
yeah,
should have the ability to change our mind and
exactly.
give our informed reasons as to why we changed our mind,
Exactly.
and people should respect that. And it
Right.
just doesn't happen. So,
I feel that I believe in debates because I think it's a win-win. If I'm wrong, I've learned something. If I'm not wrong, you learn something. Either way, we're learning and we're coming together. And it
absolutely.
shouldn't be a fight. It should be where we exchange ideas. And maybe I was using faulty research, and I didn't understand the conclusion completely. And you enlightened me. You helped me find it, or I did it for you. Either way, it's a win-win, and then we move forward.
Mhm.
So if you're debating in good faith, like you said, then you see it as nothing wrong with that. You see it as something positive. If you're debating in bad faith just to score a point and purposely changing what the other person is saying to score points, then it's not a real debate.
Mhm. Absolutely. So, what is we're going to move on here to your experiences as a school board volunteer, an elected school board official. But the last question that I want to ask you about the homeschooling bit specifically is, what would you say is the most significant thing that you learned as a homeschooling mom?
I think not to be afraid to try new things with your kids. And because some of the things that I ended up doing with them were wonderful. And I would not think of myself, if you had asked me maybe 20 years ago to describe myself, I would not put creativity down at all. I felt like I was a plan, I was structured, this is what I had to do, and this is how I'm going to do it. And my kids just changed that. I had to learn how to reach them on their level. I had to learn how to be creative, and I enjoyed it. I had to figure out how to get them from point A to point B, how, different pathways to take. And I like that about me, and I think that in using that for them, I use it now a lot when I'm talking to people, trying to get them to see my point of view, using different metaphors, using different things that I think it was only through homeschooling that I realized this part of myself. And so so many things that you do, it opens up another insight about who you are. Human interaction also helps you learn through their eyes who you are and what you could do and what you're not afraid of doing anymore. And I wanted my kids also to see me in that light. Maybe if I didn't homeschool, I didn't have kids, maybe I wouldn't feel the urge for them to see me in another role. And so through homeschooling, I think I learned a lot about myself and my creativity and what I can do.
Mhm. And we talked about the fact that, you have been really integral and involved in, um, getting your children as part of their schooling involved in civic engagement in some form or another, and in volunteering. And you've really played that active role. And part of that was actually deciding to run for school board in your community and in the area that you lived. So what made you decide to take that on, to do that? And, and why do you think it's important?
When I began homeschooling my kids, State College had something where you could dual enroll them. You could let them take some courses at the school, and you could take courses at home. But we were still considered homeschoolers, and so I got into a couple of arguments with the superintendent, with a few other principals all the time. And one of them had mentioned to me something like, you're one of the parents that have such wonderful ideas and inputs, and so you're so passionate about education. You should be on the school board, or you should be like the president of the PTO. And I said, yeah, like that's going to happen. But I felt that it was a criticism. Like he was telling me, instead of you fighting for everyone, you're just fighting for your own kids. You're just taking them out of the school, and you're thinking like, the rest of you, I don't care about. And that was pretty hurtful, because part of it was true. That's exactly what I was doing. But then I had a commitment to my own kids, and I just know that sometimes all the bureaucracy before things get changed, my kids would be going into high school, they would be graduating, and then these change would be implemented, and I couldn't wait that long. So I said, yeah, right. I said, when I'm finished educating my kids, I would come back and run for school board. But I was just joking, I was just, tongue in cheek kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And when my kids were gone, why don't I run for school board? This is a perfect time to do so. And I knew a lot of the in and outs of what's going on in the school district, because I kept myself involved in that. And that was some of the questions when I went door knocking. People were like, you homeschool your kids. Why are you running for school board? Like, it's like, I said, because I love education. I love what school stands for. I think public education, I'm a person of public education, and I think that it's important, it's vital to our continued success in this world. And I want to do whatever I can to make that continue to work for everyone. And so I won, I guess. Yeah, I guess they liked what I had to say.
And how has your experience been since?
It's been wonderful. There's a lot of things that I assumed that I knew that I found out I didn't. um, there's some learning curve, but overall, the different committees are very interesting. Um, and I get to speak with the constituents, the people that voted for us all, and I get to listen to them. And they write letters to us all the time, which is very helpful, because then they're involved. And I love, we get like 10, 20 letters sometimes a day, depending if it's an issue that's really matters to the community. And I love seeing that. I love seeing community engagement, because you should have a voice. We're representing what you want. And so I read all the emails. I don't skim them. I read all of them, and I make a note of it. And some of the the letters that we get helps me to change my mind on a certain issue, how I'm going to vote. So I do think that it's a wonderful thing of public engagement.
Hmm. And I think it's drawing that awareness. You're sort of an instrument of drawing that awareness, out of the school being a closed, specifically closed, area, and the community being a closed area, and home being a closed area, and all of them are actually, woven quite tightly within each other. And a lot of times people don't stop to realize that the school is the community, the home is the community is the school and the home, and it's all intermingled and interwoven. And these issues that come to play is because people sort of forget. Sometimes parents will send their kids to school and say, okay, now this is your time to do this. This is, you send the kids off to school and the school's responsible for this. But actually the parents forget that, no, you're still responsible for your children and their learning. And the school sometimes forgets that, wait a second, we need to send this home and we need to communicate better with the home, because it is all part of that, that community of learning that comes about.
That is so well said. And I agree 100% of everything you said about the community, how we need each other, how we'll learn from each other. And I think how we'll get stronger if we understand that we're all working for the good of the children. If we keep that as our focus, as our goal, as our North Star, then I think we could all come together with their input. But the only thing that I would have to disagree with is, as far as some of the parents thinking that once I send the kids to school, that's your job. Because sometimes culturally, the way I grew up, that is kind of a Haitian culture, that we educate the well-being of our children as far as their manners, their roles in life at home. You educate the children as far as the math, the science, that's your job. And so my parents never went to parent-teacher conference because they didn't see the need to, unless there was a problem. You do your job and I'll do my job. And so now I think we do have a lot of some immigrants, because of the university, from different areas of the world. And I think when we have their children, I think we shouldn't assume that they're not coming to Parent Teachers Association because of the fact they don't care. I think we have to assume that sometimes it's cultural and sometimes they just don't have the time. Mm-hmm. But so we need to find a way to reach out to these parents and let them know that they are involved and they're welcome. Their opinions are welcome in the well-being of their children. Yeah. So, and the more we intermingle with different people from around the world, the more we get to understand their children, which is so important in education.
Yeah, absolutely. That value in that, getting the word out that this is a partnership.
Yes.
And, and like you said, when you give the reins over to the school as an institution to do what they need to do, you're still part of that partnership. Exactly. And your role in this partnership as a parent is also very integral. So you said that very well as well. Traditionally, homeschooling, specifically in the U.S., has been predominantly white and often an evangelical family movement. But really a growing number, and you touched on this right at the very beginning, a growing number of Black families in the U.S. have started teaching their children at home, and also other families of color as well, immigrant families and things like that. And they've been citing, specifically Black families have cited racism as well as the pandemic as their reasons for deciding that they were going to take the control of their schooling of their children back into the home with them. So do you agree with this? And, do you have anything else to add to that?
I do agree, because especially being the only Black child in a lot of white classes, growing up, it was such an uncomfortable feeling. And a lot of times, even now, I find myself being the only Black person in these white space. And you're always second guessing, at least I used to anyway. But I think I still do it to an extent, like how you perceive. Are you representing every Black person? What you say, you have to speak to your whole group, which is not fair. It's a lot of pressure to put on one person, And so, so I do think that growing up in a community where you feel loved and respected and safe as a Black person, then you could understand who you are. You could understand your potential. If you go to school very early on and you feel ostracized, you feel the kids are not talking to you, or you feel different. And I've had a teacher, and I mentioned that really literally pushed me away for breathing on her. And I felt so embarrassed. I felt ashamed. And I never spoke up in that class again. I became withdrawn. And, it's years later, I realized this had such a tremendous effect on me.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, a lot of Black students are saying that they do undergo racism or microaggressions that some of the teachers are not even aware of that they're doing. And so these are some of the things that we're trying to address, but it's a lot to go through. And so I don't blame a lot of Black parents for wanting to homeschool their kids. That wasn't the reason that I chose to do it, but I do see the importance and how my kids were able to evolve in their own individuality. Like they didn't have to like basketball. Like these stereotypes weren't pushed on them because they didn't know they existed. Danielle didn't know that girls were not allowed to like math. She loves math, and so these are little stereotypes, these little microaggressions that we keep telling these Black kids, these Black children, that eventually they start believing it. And so the title of my book, Pressure Makes Diamond, From Homeschooling to the Ivy League, I could have said From Homeschooling to College. But I had to include Ivy League because I wanted Black parents, Black children to know that they could achieve the highest level of success. We should be allowed to compete and see ourselves in all of these spaces, from being astronauts to musicians to Nobel Prize winners. We should not say, oh, well, Black people, we don't do that. No, why not? And so it wasn't a way for me to elevate myself and my kids, or look at us, we got to the Ivy League. No, it was a way of saying that we could all do that if we believe in ourselves, if we raise our kids with confidence and knowledge to know that there's no space that they should not be feel welcome and allowed in. So that was the purpose of continuing that subtitle of my book.
People of color lack that relatable identification or identibility with the people in the schools that are teaching them, and also the curriculum. They don't have. They don't have the history, and they don't have the books, and they don't have the stories, and they don't have the learning that pertains to them. It is very in not just in the US, in other countries as well, including Ireland, it is very whitewashed. It is very white. The school curriculum tends to be very white dominant. And I think that that's another reason why Black families should be empowered to take back the learning for their children. It's because then you can make sure that the history is covered in as it should be in its full entirety, and that stories that are read to the children takes in the color of their skin, or the hair, the textures of their hair, or these kinds of things, and that your children can identify with their learning because they are part of their learning. They realize, oh yeah, this is me, I can identify with this.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so funny about books and stuff, like all the books that's dealing with Black should not only be on slavery. Absolutely. That's not the only thing that we should be known for. And even movies. And I was telling my husband, oh, wouldn't it be good for my book to become a movie, and it's just a family life. And you could, it's about a Black family, but some white people that read my book said, oh God, your son reminded me of my son, and different things that happened to me. And I said, yeah, because we're like a normal family.
Yes.
Okay, we have high achievers, but it's not always about drugs and all of these negative stereotypes. There was that movie Parenting, I think, or 12's a Dozen, I think, with Steve Martin. I love that story. And I said, why couldn't we have a Black family with that? They had 12 kids and all the chaos that occurs with having 12 kids, and he's a coach. And why couldn't a Black family play that?
Yeah.
Why do we always have to add this added dimension of Black family being dysfunctional if we're not drug infested? Or, why can't we just have feel good stories about us without a lot of these negative stereotypes?
Absolutely. There is something that you said earlier. You made, I want to correct you on it. And I'm sorry that I feel like I have to correct you on it, but you said we're like a normal family. No, you're not like a normal family. You are a normal family. So I want to make sure that you embrace that as well,
Exactly. Well, thank you.
And empower you to say that you are not like a normal family. You definitely, most certainly are a normal family. Obviously, the beginning of 2020 really led many children around the world to being schooled from, going to school every day on a daily basis to all of a sudden they're being schooled from home, and all the logistics that were involved in that between the school and the home and again, the community. How is this, what has happened because of the pandemic, different from homeschool? And, what advice would you give parents who are now thinking about homeschooling their kids beyond 2022?
I think that they have to look realistically. Is it something that they want to do? And it's not something momentarily, because there's a lot of things involved, and you have to also get buy-in from your children. And the older they are, they may not want that. They may want to be with their friends and everything else. I still believe that you're the parents and you make the decision, but you want them to believe that it's for their best interest. You want them to believe in it. And because if you both are on board, then it'll be more successful. So you have to know the reason that you're doing it. And it's not just everybody's doing it kind of stuff, because it could be hurtful. Your kid could lose a whole year of schooling because you didn't know what you were doing, or you weren't sure if you should do that. So you really should think carefully about, is it something that you want to do? So once they're excited about it, then you do your research. There is so many more research open for homeschooling, Black homeschooling, different types of homeschooling, unschooling, which could be a little confusing too. So you just have to, again, know your children, and see what kind of schooling works best for you. And beyond that, I did my own research. I looked into a book like Genius Denied when I realized that my kids were so gifted. What are some steps, how the brain works? I wanted to understand that. And a few things about educating the whole child. And I wrote a lot of these books that I used in my notes in the back of the book. So if anyone wants to look at the books, the research that I did in the beginning, because like I said, there wasn't a lot of homeschooling website at the time, and especially Black schooling website.
As we get ready to say our goodbyes to each other through this great conversation we've had today, I ask you if you have any final words of wisdom or advice for listeners.
I do actually, and we touched on it. And I think that was like the essence or the overarching theme of our talk today. And Martin Luther King had says that your life ends when you become silent. And I believe I would make a tweak to that, even though I do agree with him, but I would tweak it a little bit to say your life ends when you stop learning.
Yes, if you're not learning, you're not living. I think there's another similar kind of saying to that, and it's so true. Totally, you and I are both on board and full supporters of lifelong learning and, self-directed learning and active learning and just, always learning, as Michelangelo says, I'm still learning. That's something important that we should always remember. Carline, thank you so much for being such an honored guest on my podcast. I have really, really enjoyed our conversation together. And I hope to continue to follow you and the success of your children as well. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it. Thank you for having me.
If you're interested in what Carline's kids are up to these days, stay tuned after the outro for some bonus content. We have a little bit of a discussion as to what they're up to. Thanks for listening. I hope that you've enjoyed this discussion on A Dash of Salt, a space where you'll always find fresh and current discussions on society and learning today, seasoned with just the right touch of experts in education and a dash of sociological imagination. Please be sure to like and share this episode And don't forget to subscribe to A Dash of Salt on Podbean so that you don't miss the next episode. Thanks so much, and we'll chat again soon.
And here's your opportunity to shout out about your amazing students as a teacher. What are your children up to today? And tell us a little about each of them and what they're up to today and how your relationship is with them.
Okay, I'll start with Danielle, my oldest. She started it all. I refer to her as my multi-talented child. And when she went to Harvard, she was the first to start this trend. She was pre-med because she wanted to be like mommy and daddy. And she did a lot of research and everything else. And at graduation or the year before, she decides to switch into consulting. And I'm like shocked. And she says, Mom, you know me, consulting is perfect for me because I could consult on medicine. I could consult on computer. I could do this for a while. I'll never get bored. I'll never get tired. And I said, at least take the MCAT because you may change your mind. This part, and she says, Mom, I don't want to just do medicine now. I want to see what else is out there. So consulting would give me an opportunity to do that. So she takes the MCAT. She was not happy about it. And she scores like 99 percentile. And so it's good for 3 years. And in 3 years, she says, Mom, I'm ready to go to medical school. So she does all her consulting, all her traveling. She learns so much. And she presents these big things, PowerPoint presentation to CEOs, head of companies. And now she's in school and she goes, Mom, I miss school. She's at UPenn. She's in her second year. And she says, Mom, this is such a breeze comparing to doing presentation and data crunching. And I love being a student. This is so easy. I miss school. So she's doing well. She took a 3-year hiatus and she's back in school. My second child, Michael, he went to MIT. He was my musician. He minored in music. He was in the orchestra in MIT, but he majors in computer programming. And he did almost like Danielle did for about 2.5, 3 years. He worked at a computer programming firm, software developer in Washington, D.C. And after that, he says, Mom, I'm going back to school. I want to get my PhD in AI. So he is doing that now at Carnegie Mellon. My Nicholas, he went to Dartmouth. He was pre-med. He was my other creative child. And when he took this thing in high school where he saw a gallbladder being removed, with robotics and everything else, he thought that was so ingenious. He goes, oh my God, Mom, that looks so good. The doctor hardly even touched the patient. The doctor was playing all these video games and everything else. So when he was at Dartmouth, he took this software programming course. And then he worked for the developer. He did that while he was at school. And his pre-med eventually changed to VR, virtual reality, and he switched his major into that. And now he's at Stanford, getting his master's in virtual reality computer. Not his nemesis, his little brother, Joey, who throughout the book, they were at odds with each other. They're now both roommates at Stanford. Joey's getting his PhD in economics. He loved math. He continued to do math. He's gotten a lot of awards. He graduated from Harvard, and his twin, Jackie, joined him at Harvard a year later. They were together, and this pandemic, unfortunately, her last year, she's back, he graduated a year earlier, and that was the pandemic. So they didn't really get back together. So her last year, she said it was kind of sad because she would walk by where his dorm was. They would catch lunch together. And, she missed out on all that. And she's my social child who loves people, who loves, she will get on the airport. I go pick her up when she comes home from Boston. And there's like 2-3 people. Oh, Jackie, hi, Jackie. I said, my God, you've just been back for what? a few minutes and everybody's recognizing you already. So she has a lot of friends still in the community. And she's graduating this year from Harvard. She majored in psychology and she minored in economics. And she'll be working at a firm, I believe, in Chicago next year. So, yeah.
Yeah, your kids are amazing, and you're amazing as well. And again, hats off to both you and your husband for, being so involved in raising such amazing contributors to our society and to our communities. And just some amazing, brilliant children that you have.